Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. Today, John and I are going to be talking about some of our passions and personal preferences when we're dungeon mastering a game, mastering a game. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. Today, John and I are going to be talking about what really makes us passionate when we're playing a game, specifically when we are the GM of that game. He and I have lots of conversations off camera that you guys aren't always privy to, where we're able to kind of shoot the shit, go back and forth. We're always wearing our shirts. And now we're going to give you a little bit of that experience, hopefully. So, John, if you would, let's dive into this.
I have a question first before we get into this. What does wearing our shirts mean? Is that like a thing that I should be familiar with?
Well, it's not a cool thing that the cool kids are saying nowadays, but eventually they will. It really just means that you're fully clothed in the course of conversation.
I mean, is that an expectation that you would be naked during the course of conversation for this?
Well, we're not always on video, I guess. I guess there are some cases.
So we're still you're just validating that we continue to wear clothing off camera.
That is what I'm validating.
God. Okay, so I'm okay. What we're talking about today is we're talking about basically like what players would expect from us if we were to GM, right? So in the games that you and I run, what do we do? And this is, I think this is beyond just like homebrew rules. This is more like table rules, I would say, or even table rules may be a little bit too strong. I think so to jump this off, and I think this is kind of like a generic thing that maybe most GMs would agree with, is that you play the game in order to have fun. And I think that sometimes that where it gets misconstrued in a few places is sometimes the thought is like, well, the players are supposed to have fun. But one of the things that I feel pretty passionately about is that I want to have fun too. So I'm not just there to make your wet dreams about your Drow Ranger to come to life so that you can relive or you can live out this fantasy of playing this particular character. It's important that I have fun in the game too, and if I'm not having fun, then you're not going to have fun, probably because I'm not excited to play the game. And I think that it's important for players to realize that their character is not the most important thing in the world. They need to make concessions to make the game fun for other characters and for the GM. And as a GM, I make concessions in some of the things that I would prefer to try and make the game more enjoyable for my players.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I clearly agree with you that fun is the reason why I play Dungeons and Dragons or any type of tabletop role-playing game. And it's interesting that we kind of label that as the primary reason why we come to gameplay, because my first game of D&D when I was like 13, 14 years old was not fun. I sat down. The DM was very controlling.
Oh, I remember this. Okay, yeah.
They managed the game. They told us what to do, how to play, and when we didn't do what he told us to do, he dropped the Titanic on us and killed us. Like, it was not fun. It was not an enjoyable experience. But there was enough about the conceptualization of like playing fantasy characters, going on adventures, battling monsters, having all those tropes and themes that kind of fit within genre that I was passionate about, that I wanted to come back and do it again with a different GM, right. A different set of players.
And I think I played with that GM once as well, and I had a similar experience. It was one of the first times that we had played as a group, and it was not as enjoyable as I wanted it to be. And as a result, you and I started playing one-on-one sessions with each other, where I think you GM'd most of the time, and this was the Beck-me version of the rule set, right? So that was a big piece of it. And I think that this is an important thing, though, is that if you are playing with a group that you're not having fun with, moving on is not outside of the realms of possibility. And that's really something that I think is just being honest with both yourself and with whatever players you happen to be playing with. Whether you're a player and you're being honest with the GM, or whether you're the GM and you're being honest with your players, is that if you're not enjoying it, there's no reason to continue to be miserable. Just move on. It's not that big of a deal to just go, you know what, I'm out. This is not what I wanted it to be. I can go play with somebody else and have more fun with a style that we want to play with.
And that's really interesting because you and I have had lots of conversations about even how our own styles differ and how different people that have been within our play groups differ. And there's kind of this continuum, I think, on where people fall at in terms of what's important to them in the course of gameplay. I'd really like to talk more about the concessions that you're speaking of in how you not only take an honest look at your own play style and what you do, but also recognizing those of your play group and your GM and recognizing where you may have to give or take a little bit to have the game be enjoyable while also allowing others to really enjoy the fullness of the game.
Well, you and I both run dark fantasy games most of the time, right? So we lend on we lend to be tend to lean. There we go. I was combining lend and tend, lean, and we are on the darker side of things in a lot of the games that we run.
We're the darker side of things in reality, folks.
For anybody who's watched the videos knows that we're obsessed with like lingering injuries and all that type of thing. I've incorporated those in games, and some players are not excited about having, their leg chopped off as a player or as a character, I guess. I don't chop off player legs, but they're not excited about that. And so I even though as a player, and when you've run the same rules for me, I get super excited when I have to roll on that injury chart. For me, it's fun. But for other players, they're like, I really don't want that to happen. And so what I do is I leave the rules as an option, and most of the time what I do is I make it a decision on the part of the player, where you get some kind of benefit if you choose to roll on it. So in our current session, you can remain up and fighting after you've hit 0 hit points if you roll on the penalty chart. So you can choose to go unconscious, at which point you don't have to worry about it. But if you don't, if you do roll on it, then you can continue to fight with the same stipulation of if you reach a certain point, then you just die, which could work in any edition of D&D where you have some kind of death's door option that you don't immediately die at 0 hit points. That's an example. I also make concessions for things allowing classes that I don't particularly enjoy, allowing races or other things in the game that I don't particularly enjoy or don't think have a place in the world that I'm creating. I will often allow those things to go ahead and slide through just because I want the player to be able to play what they want to play. And it's not that big of a deal if I allow a Warforged to come into a game that I didn't particularly want Warforged in.
Yeah, John will allow you to play a warlock, but it doesn't mean you're not going to have a harder time trying to get through the dungeon.
Yeah. I have never outlawed them, but I just don't. I don't particularly like them.
I do really like the fact that you approach this from a mechanics viewpoint and saying, I have certain mechanics that I have in the course of gameplay that some of my characters may not like me house ruling. And so then I make accommodations to that so that they can still enjoy certain aspects of the gameplay without being beholden to whatever it is that I've kind of thrust upon them.
Yeah.
And for me, of course, I look more at the storytelling and the story-based aspect of the game, the role-playing aspect of the game, and I have to make the same concessions, not only as a player, but also as the GM. And this as being in my games. As the GM, I have NPCs that have voices. I have maybe some monologues that I provide for certain information. I really like to get into the story building in that aspect and engaging my characters, but I don't require my characters to come back and have a voice that they're going to talk to me in and maintain a first person point of view when they're engaging with me through the eyes of their character. Things like that I would really love and enjoy and that would enhance the game for me. But I don't say you're going to do this or I'm cutting off your leg.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. I would prefer that, players come in and they role play and they do a voice and they do all that other stuff. But I don't do that 100% of the time with NPCs because sometimes the information they're after is succinct enough to where me getting into character and role playing out a very brief conversation is to me a misuse of time. But at the same time, it's like if you're interacting with an NPC that is either somebody that you have known for a while or is obviously important to the plot, and I'm coming in there and providing all of this rambunctious personality to go on the other end of it, I would very much like to see that role play reciprocated so that it feels like there is more of a scene occurring in those situations. And even though I say that as a GM, I am very bad about doing that as a player. It's strange. I can very much get into character when I GM, and I can do that. But as soon as I'm a player, for some reason, it feels like there's a focus and a spotlight on me that I don't experience it as a GM, and I have no idea why.
So you and I are both committed to this idea of having fun in the course of gameplay and trying to make it fun for everyone else. I'm curious if you can recall, is there a concession you remember having to have made for the group, either as the GM or as the player, that you didn't really like having to make, but you're like, I'm going to go ahead and do this so that everybody can enjoy the game in the terms in which they've kind of set?
For setting up for like an entire group, or...
Perhaps. Like, I'll give my example first as you're kind of thinking about it.
That might help, because I'm still, yeah.
So we used to play pretty frequently with folks that really like to, I don't want to say build broken characters, but maxing characters. And building characters that are really powerful, really strong, that are heroic in nature. And there was one game where we were building level 15 characters on the onset to start the campaign. And I was like, terrified, did not enjoy it, sick to my stomach, not in my throat, in having to do this. But I knew that with the group we had at the time, this was something they were really passionate about and everybody was on board with. So I had to go spend time reading forums, researching my character, reading additional D&D books to really be able to build a character that was quality enough to run with this party, to function at that level without me just stepping out on the battlefield and having my dick chopped off, the first space. So I had to do the work. And sadly enough, I spent hours doing this, not hours, probably longer, days doing this. And we only played the session like twice, and then that was it. And then so I spent all this time building a character. But it was a concession I was willing to make a character that was equivalent to where their characters were, to have that game that they wanted, even though that wasn't the part that really brought the joy out of the game for me.
So if I recall, your character still wasn't that good.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No,
that time wasted for no respect.
No, I'm fairly certain that it was 3.5, and I think you were building a knight.
Yes,
which is not a optimal character in that edition, or an optimal class. And so even though you put in all the effort, it was still like, well, why'd you build a knight? type of situation. I can't think of a specific scenario for myself. I'm sure it'll come to me later where it's like something I've come up with. In general, I GM more often than I play. I don't honestly get to play all that much, and I haven't played consistently, I don't feel like, in I don't know, years and years and years. Mm-hmm. I played a few games with you where we've done some stuff, and I do get to play then. And most of the time, I'm so excited to play that I'm more than willing to, like... for me as a player buy-in is super important. If the GM comes in and says, these are the stipulations, you have to be specific races, specific classes, whatever, I don't care. I am more than happy to jump into the GM's world and abide by whatever rules they've set forth. I don't mind the idea of going in and everybody playing rogues or magic classes being completely eliminated or anything like that. I'm usually not so married to a character concept that I'm not willing to make concessions for those things. Generally speaking, when I'm the GM, I don't tend to get that same level of buy-in from my players, which can be frustrating, but I'm willing to make the concessions to allow the players to do what it is that they want to do. So, like I said, classes, races, whatever, I'm more often than not just going to say, yeah, okay, you can do that. Let's figure out a way to make that work. And I'll do a one-on-one conversation with that person where I'll come in and say, okay, you want to play a tabaxi in a world where that doesn't make any sense and that race isn't replicated anywhere. Let's talk about how a tabaxi can make sense in this world and talk about it. And I do that type of thing fairly frequently to make sure that there is an opportunity for the player to have something like that. But I already talked about that earlier, so I'll leave it at that. I make concessions as a GM. I very rarely do it as a player, I don't think.
That makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate you giving that GM perspective, because I don't know that I'm as good at doing that. I know we're running out of time, but there's another question that came to mind that I think is important for us to add in here at the end, and that is, what things do you do as a GM and as a player to make sure you're still having fun, even at the expense of making concessions?
I like rules. and homebrewing, that is 99% of the enjoyment that I derive from the game, honestly. 99% is large. There are other things that I enjoy a lot. I enjoy role-playing. I enjoy combat, especially tactical combat. But generally speaking, in my free time, if I'm not working on a campaign, I am working on some kind of rules in the background. I'm building classes, I'm building monsters, I'm building things. And I'm very much a builder. If I get to do that and I get to put it in the game, then I'm very excited to see how it plays out. Now, I will say that sometimes it fails utterly, and I'm okay with that. I approach it with the sense that, okay, that didn't work. Let me identify why it didn't work, and let me fix it, make it better, and do something else with it. Currently, what we're running for our current campaign is a hodgepodge of mixed rule sets and homemade rules and other things like that have been thrown into a game, where a good portion of it is second edition. I've pulled in BECMI information. I've pulled in rules that I have made myself, and I think we have a 170-page document of rules that we're using that it's almost its own rule system for the game we're running. That, to me, is super exciting to be able to build and then be able to see it come to life in an actual game session. That is how I derive my fun.
And as a GM, see, I'm almost the opposite again in how I find fun as a GM. Now, like you, I do like to build in new monsters, new weapons, some like new artifacts and things to be utilized throughout the course of gameplay, and I find a lot of fun with that. But I will write pages and pages and pages of backstory and documents and story and mythology and stuff that goes into the world that I may never share with the players because they are not interested in it, but it's exciting for me to build that for them. From the GM perspective. Now, as a player, and you and I have talked about this before, but for the audience, I will build elaborate backstories for my characters. I give them little nuanced things to say. I really build up their personalities, and I find ways to kind of slide that into the course of gameplay. Even if I don't have engagement or interaction from my other players in a role-playing aspect, I role play with myself, so to speak, where I always have like a side commentary on what's happening and what's going on through the eyes and lips of my character. For yourself as a character, there are things that you do to make sure you're having fun as a character. Maybe if you don't have the rest of your party or even the GM bringing that element of fun to you.
For me as a player, I enjoy. I mean, a lot of what we played was the 3.5 edition era, which is very much like you were describing earlier. You have to do research to build your character. You have to, there's optimal and suboptimal builds and that type of stuff. That's one of the things that I enjoy about it, is I enjoy making a character that is unique, that is against trope in a lot of situations, where I can try and see what I can get the mechanics within the system to do, and then I like to see that come to life in game. So there's the mechanical aspect of that I very much enjoy. What classes can I combine? What spells can I use that are not traditional? That type of stuff. Because there's very much, especially in 5th edition, there's this kind of sense that there are the best spells in the game, there are the best feats in the game, there are the best somethings, and you always have to have those in certain classes in order for that class to come and work the way that it's intended to, or it to be optimal. I try to go against that as much as possible because I find that enjoyable. In the same way, I enjoy the characters to kind of come across in the same way. I like to roleplay characters that aren't necessarily in line with something like that. So if I can play a barbarian that's particularly charismatic, or I can play some kind of a cleric who is very intelligent and not just wise, so that they have this kind of book learnedness about them that makes them seem different. That type of stuff I find enjoyable, and being able to role play that to where it's like I'm not just another life cleric that has chosen these things, or I'm not just another fighter that's gone great weapon mastery with Sentinel. Like, to go against the grain on some of those things I think is enjoyable. So I do want to point out one thing, because I didn't get a chance to respond to what you were talking about with the way that you GM and your lore aspects. As a player, it's very enjoyable to experience, because since I GM so much, I see the same thing over and over and over again. I know the monster manual back to front, because all I do is put those same monsters in front of my players, which is part of why I build new monsters. But I know that, especially in some of the recent games I played with you, where you've gotten very creative with some of the monsters you pulled in out of myth and lore, I can't identify them. I don't know what I should be doing against them. And as a player, it's super exciting. it's difficult, I think, sometimes as a GM to get into a game and know what the monster is and what it does and what its abilities are and that type of thing. It can be very frustrating because then you're trying to divorce yourself from your own out-of-game knowledge versus your player's knowledge. And it's really refreshing to get into a game where you've pulled in some crazy monster out of myth and lore that isn't in D&D, and I have no idea how to deal with it. And it's like, well, I guess that I'm just going to have to figure it out. And that is a very fun experience, I think.
Yeah, and I do think that if you're going to do that as a GM, is letting your players know about it. And even, I know I do this sometimes too, I'll take known monsters and I change what they do and what their abilities are. And I try to give pre-warning that the monsters you're going to face may not be what you know, just so that you don't go running in thinking this is going to work immediately like it did in all past games that I've played. Because I don't know, I find that enjoyable too. I don't want it to always be the same when I go in and start fighting something. I want to have a little bit of a shock value.
Yeah. So I think that that's probably a good stopping point for us on this one. We tried a little bit of a different approach on this video than we have on some of the other ones. So if you guys enjoyed it, please let us know in the comments below. I think it's something that we're going to return to from time to time as we're kind of talking honestly about some of the stuff that we're doing and not just trying to be informative in every single video. If you have not already, please subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Dungeon Brew.